sit down and we'll open class with a prayer. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your day. We thank you for the opportunity that we may meet together and more fully understand what it means to worship you and why you have directed us in the ways that you have. We ask that we would see your wisdom in the word and that we would apply it. We ask also that you would be with our families wherever they are today, that you would guide them and that you would guard them. Father, we thank you most of all for Christ and what he means to each of us in our lives. And may others more clearly understand the redemptive and healing power that comes through his finished work on our behalf. In Christ's holy name, amen. Okay, we're going to start talking about music in the Bible this morning, and this will not just simply be looking at the New Testament use of a cappella singing. We will get there, but in order to get there, there is a journey, if you really want to understand it, that you have to take, and it starts way back in the Old Testament. I wanted to just start for a moment with this is a statement from Psalm 100, a psalm of thanksgiving, where the psalmist just says, in relation to God, come before him with joyful singing. And then later he will say, enter his courts with praise. Song and singing have always been a part of the interaction that God's people have with one another and that they have with God himself. After John died, or roughly, or shortly after the death of John the Baptist, there was not John the Baptist, John the Apostle. There was a gentleman by the name of Pliny the Younger. He was appointed the governor of a province called Bithynia in the Roman Empire. And at the time, Christianity was illegal, and he was under the mandate of the Emperor Trajan to take a census of his province and determine who was in it. Well, he did that. And to his great alarm, he discovered that his province was chock full of Christians. And out of this, he decided, well, I probably ought to find out what these people are doing. Michael, can you advance the slide? Thank you.
They were doing more than you but did.
Yeah, way more. Way more than that is, you're right. Okay, so being that he was a really kind and generous and holy man, he arrested two women, and instead of just asking them what was going on, he decided he would torture them to get information out of them. And so he did. And what came out of that was this quote. It's very famous, and you've probably heard before. It's one of the most famous quotes about the early church and its worship. In his letter to Trajan, he says, they asserted, however, that the sum and substance of their fault or error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn and sing responsively a hymn to Christ. Now, I think we ought to read the whole quote because I think it honors these early Christians. That's the part we're most interested in. But they sang this song, this singing responsibly as a hymn to Christ as to a God, and to bind themselves by oath not to some crime, but not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery, nor falsify their trust, nor to refuse to return a trust when called upon to do so. When this was over, it was their custom to depart and to assemble again to partake of food, but ordinary and innocent food. Even this, they affirmed, they had ceased to do after my edict, by which, in accordance with your instructions, I had forbidden political associations. See, they think of any type of religion having to do with the state. That's why they say political associations. Accordingly, I judged it all the more necessary to find out what the truth was by torturing two female slaves. Roman Empire was a real cruel place, who were called deaconesses, servants. But I discovered nothing else. I love this last part coming from this rank, horrible pagan, but depraved, excessive superstition. Did you know that's what Christianity is? I could do a whole sermon right there on the way people see Christianity. But for our part this morning, what we're interested in is what he just happens to record historically. And he's just recording facts. He's certainly not a friend of Christians. He's tortured two of them to get the information that he wants. He's interested in what the Emperor Trajan wants and the quote-unquote unity of Rome. And he says the fact is these ladies and some other folks, they get together on a fixed day. What day would that be? That's exactly right. Before dawn. You guys want to do that? you want to get up and at worship service before the sun rises? That's what the early Christians did, and a lot of that had to do with their work schedules. Before dawn, consequently, this is off the subject, but a lot of what we do has to do with our work schedules too over the years. And sang responsibly a hymn to Christ. Okay. In first century New Testament worship, it consisted of at least 3 types of songs. Now this is a fact. Whatever else we want to say here, it is an absolute dyed-in-the-wool fact that the early church sang a cappella. Does anybody know what the word a cappella means? Do what? Okay, it means literally as in the church. That's the meaning of the word. Yeah, but exactly, that's what we're getting at. So why does this word come to mean as in the church? What happens in the church? Because there is no instance, literally for hundreds and hundreds of years, there is no debate whatsoever. There's not even a discussion in the early quote-unquote church fathers, which I hate that term, the early Greek writers before what we call the ante-Nicene and post-Nicene. That's a whole nother discussion. But in all the commentaries and all the writings of all the things that are argued about, and everything is argued about, but this isn't. There's complete silence and complete agreement that the church sang a cappella. Now, why that is, we'll see. And the Old Testament helps us to understand this very clearly as we get into it. But 3 types of songs. Psalms. We'll look at some of these because the early church was established in terms of human beings by who? Jews. That's right. Okay, that's a huge point in all of this. And what had they done all of their life in terms of singing? They had sung the Psalms. Okay, and so as they come in, Acts chapter 2, and as the church is established, what we're going to see is they're going to keep doing what they've been doing all their lives. There's not going to be any change here. Hymns. These are likely songs, what we would say, these are songs that are going up to God. If you want an example, I won't go over there right now, but if we have time in this class, we'll go through several instances in the New Testament where we have a recording of an early hymn. And Revelation 4:11 is likely one of those, and it is a hymn praising God. And then spiritual songs simply refer to those kinds of songs that have spiritual content. And this would be stuff that we sing to one another, singing to one another. So these are the ways the early church sang. And of course, Ephesians 5:19 is very clear on this. But both historically, and we usually say historically and biblically, the Bible is historical, but I mean outside of the Bible historically, and within the text of the Bible, this is simply true. And anybody that's ever looked at this will tell you this is just an undisputed fact. This is one of those facts that you've got no foot to stand on at all if you try to go into some kind of belief that instrumental music was used in the early church. Now, we really have to start in the Old Testament to get to where we need to get in the New Testament. And this is, you'll see why as we move through this. Whoa, yeah. Yes, sir.
Going back to that Psalm, what was it, 5:19, Colossians 3:16. Strong says that to be used in second pedal to accompany the voice part of further song.
Okay, I will get to that. I'm not going to deal with it this morning. The answer is in the period of Koine Greek, it refers to a cappella singing. I'll talk more about it as we get there. Okay, in Genesis 4:21, we have the beginning of music in the Old Testament. And I just point this out to say that from very early on, we have music as a part of the human experience. No one says how this came about, or if God gave it to the people, or if Jubal, the father of all who played the lyre and the pipe, maybe he was just messing around one day and whittling on a stick. We don't know. But music comes in very, very early, as we are in the early stages of the human experience. Now, as far as music being something that is a part of worship, this is one of those verses that you can read and kind of just move along and never really think much about it. But in Numbers 10:1, when the people are in the wilderness, it says that the Lord spoke further to Moses, saying, make yourself 2 trumpets of silver. Now, these 2 trumpets of silver are going to be super, super important as we look at worship and as we look at the Levitical system. Of hammered work, you shall make them, and you shall use them for summoning the congregation and for having the camps set out. Now, he's going to say a lot more about them, but notice you have these 2 trumpets. And also notice that he says, make for yourself 2 trumpets of silver. Does that sound like a command? Very much so. He specifies 2 instruments. And then he says in verse 8, he says, the priestly sons of Aaron, moreover, shall blow the trumpets. And this shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generation. So not only has he told Moses that this is what I want you to make, 2 trumpets of hammered silver, but then he turns around in verse 8 and he says that the priests are going to be those that play them. Now, if you go to verse 10, in Numbers 10, and I'm sorry if I move quickly through all this. I don't have any idea how fast I should move through some of this or how slowly I should move through it. So we're just going to get started this morning and I'll kind of get a feel for how much I can cover. In Numbers 10 and 10, we start understanding the significance of these 2 trumpets, okay? He says, also in the day of your gladness and in your appointed feast, and on the first days of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over your sacrifices of your peace offerings or memorial offerings, depending on your translation. And they shall be a reminder of you before your God. I am the Lord your God. All right, so we're going to blow these trumpets over these offerings. Already, worship looks a little different than what you and I are used to, right? These burnt offerings and these memorial offerings. Where are the burnt offerings and the memorial offerings, the peace offerings? Where are they offered? In the temple. Okay, Fern, in the temple is going to be a phrase you guys are going to get tired of hearing me say as we go through this class. Okay? I'm going to say, where did it happen? And the answer is going to be in the temple. Okay, so you already got the answer before we get there. Okay? Now, remember, the temple or the tabernacle before it is a holy place. And way back in Deuteronomy 12 and 4, God is looking at the people around and he's saying, you're not going to worship like them. You're not going to act like me, like they do towards me. And so he says there to all of the people that you shall seek the Lord at the place your God will choose. So notice how all this is working. Moses, you make me 2 trumpets of hammered silver. Moses, that's what I want. That's a specified instrument. Number 2, Moses, the priest, are going to play those instruments. Number 3, you're going to do all of this at the place I choose from all your tribes to establish his name, therefore his dwelling, and there you shall come. Deuteronomy 12 and verse 11, if we stay here, it says, then it shall come about that the place in which the Lord your God will choose for his name to dwell, there you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, and your contribution of the hand, and all your choice votive offerings, which you will vow to the Lord. Okay, now, the point of all this, and we'll throw some words in here, is that Levitical priestly worship. And those three words need to go together when we're looking at the law of Moses. The Levitical priestly worship of Israel was done here, okay? And it was done during the Levitical sacrifices, and these trumpets were played during these sacrifices. Now, David is given directions for the Levitical worship of the temple. I don't have this up here, but there's a great verse in 1 Chronicles 28 and 19. You really ought to underline when you're looking at all of this, because there David says that the Lord made me to understand all of this and to put it down in writing. So as we're looking through all of this and how music goes into the law of Moses and the worship of God's people under that law, it's always a good idea to remember nobody's making any of this stuff up. All right? David's not coming up with all this. We're going to look at Asaph, a guy who worked for, and some other Levites that are all involved. And everybody, there's this hierarchy, and it starts with God at the top, and then it moves down to David, and it's going to move down to a guy named Asaph, and it's going to move there to a guy named Jeduthun, and it's going to go throughout the entirety of the Levitical tribe in the playing of instruments and in the singing of the temple worship. So in 1 Chronicles 25 and 1, it says there, moreover, David and the commanders of the army set apart for the service some of the sons. Now these three people are going to be very, very important, okay? So David is working with these commanders of the army, and under the direction of God, David sets apart three men. They are Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, okay? And here he says, who were to prophesy with lyres and harps and cymbals, okay? In this prophesying, this idea, later we'll see the word seer used. What's a seer? Anybody? Dave, do what?
It's kind of like a prophet.
Yeah, or is a prophet, just another name for a prophet, okay? So there is a teaching element in this singing, and these men are involved in this, and they are told to do this with instruments of music. And the number of those who performed their service was, of the sons of Asaph, you can try to read that if you want, those names, and then it gives a whole bunch of his sons, and then he says, the important part at the bottom there, he says that these were under the direction of Asaph, who prophesied. How did he prophesy? With lyres, harps, and cymbals. Under the direction of the king. And the king, we're talking about Solomon when the temple is dedicated. But the king is under the direction of God. And then Asaph is under the direction of the king. And the sons of Asaph are under his direction. So there is basically this hierarchy built to direct and guide the worship of the temple and its song service. So this is Levitical singing in the worship. The priest played the trumpets, but those from the tribe of Levi who were not priests were charged with the singing of the temple, and that included things like cymbals, like that's what you would think, harps, and lyres. Not lyres like, somebody lies, but, the actual instrument. And some of these instruments in the Old Testament were actually guessing the English word. We're not exactly sure sometimes what they played, but the point is that they played that which was commanded of God. Now, in 1 Chronicles 25 and 6, it says, all these were under the direction of their father, to sing in the house of the Lord, again with cymbals and harps and lyres, for the service of the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman under the direction of the king. So again, they're all under the command of the king, who is under the command of God, the same God that said, make me 2 trumpets of silver. And then in 1 Chronicles 15 and 16, here, I just really want to point out one line here. It says, then David spoke to the chiefs of the Levites, okay? Heman, Jeduthun, Asaph, these are the people that we're talking about, to appoint their relatives. So David came in and he picked these three men, and he said, now, you go out and you need to appoint your relatives to be singers. And how were they to be singers? What does it say? With instruments of music. Okay, so why did the temple service have instrumentation? Because that's exactly what God told them he wanted under the law of Moses. All right? And it's plain as day in the book of Chronicles and other places, but definitely in the book of Chronicles when you look at the Old Testament. So again, I like the part with loud-sounding cymbals. You ever been next to somebody that you probably want to stand next to that fellow? This is Asaph played the cymbals, loud-sounding cymbals, not quite cymbals. And the end of this verse is to raise sounds of joy. Throughout the entirety of music in the Bible, the idea is that there is joy associated with it. There is joy with God when it is offered as he has asked, and there is joy among the people. But this idea floats regardless of where you are in terms of singing. Now, I didn't know how many of these verses to put in, so we'll just look at another one. 1 Chronicles 15 and 19, about 3 verses later, says, so then singers, Heman, Asaph, and Ethan, were appointed to sound aloud cymbals of bronze. What we're seeing here is that this wasn't just thrown together. The people of Israel here now have a system of music. These are professional singers that understand the arrangement of music. When we think about, you go to an orchestra and there is someone that is standing up there, the director of music, and he's doing all this kind of stuff that I don't understand, and people are playing. That is very much the picture that you need to have when you think about what went on in the temple. And there are other guys over here that are arranging music. They are writing verses, and they are figuring out how these songs are going to be sung. So this was extremely elaborate, and it was very detailed, and there was a ton of work that went into the song service of the temple under the direction of David, and ultimately of the Levitical tribe. Now, in 1 Chronicles 16 and 4, see, why do I have that? Just a minute. I think I'm missing a slide here. Hold on. Yeah, I'll just leave that right there, and you won't know why until just a minute. All right, there's let me see if I want to just skip this. No, I'll go ahead and read it. This is from 1 Chronicles 16, 4 through 7. All right, so what I'm trying to get across here with all these quotations, this is all over the book of Chronicles, exactly what God wanted. And why did they use instrumental music? Because that's exactly what God asked for, and it was specifically explained how it would happen. So in 1 Chronicles 16 and 4, it says he appointed some of the Levites as ministers before the ark of the Lord, even to celebrate and to thank and to praise the Lord God of Israel, Asaph the chief, and second to him Zechariah, then Janel, and then Shemiramoth, and there's a whole bunch of other names I'm not going to try to pronounce. But notice, with musical instruments, harps and lyres. Also Asaph played loud-sounding cymbals, and Benaiah and Jehaziel, the priest, did what? They blew trumpets. Which trumpets? Those two that were made all the way back there in Numbers chapter 10 and verse 1. Before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, then on that day, David first assigned Asaph and his relatives to give thanks to the Lord. So the trumpets there of verse 6 are the same as I mentioned of Numbers chapters 10 and verse 1. And in both cases, the priest are those that are told to blow them. Now, if you've ever gotten in a conversation with somebody about the use of instrumental music in worship in the New Testament, all right, one of the things that will get thrown in your face over and over is David did it. You ever had that line thrown at you? That is absolute ignorance on the part of anybody. I can tell you immediately that the person in question is just either repeating something someone else has said, and they have never, ever studied the worship service of Israel in terms of the law of Moses. What tribe is David of? Judah. This is kind of a big deal when we get in the New Testament, right? Because Jesus is of what tribe? That's right. And Hebrews 7 says that we've had a law change for when the priesthood change of necessity, there's a need to be a change of the law. Okay? If David is not a Levite, guess what David cannot do? He cannot be one who is performing the instrumental service in the temple. Now, he's going to go there, and he's going to participate in his presence, and he's going to offer his prayers, and he's going to bring his sacrifices. But David never, in his wildest dreams, would have worshiped God with an instrument in the temple service. Not actually have played it, because he was not a part of the tribe of Levi. All right, so somebody can talk about what David did when he was at home. You know, when he was in his own personal residence. I don't even care about that discussion. But we can put a kibosh immediately on the idea that he worshiped God in the temple and actively used an instrument to do that. Now, he was passively involved in the sense that, like the people of Israel at large, they came and they brought these sacrifices. All right. So here's a picture. Yes, sir.
David's image astonished by Zephaniah or Zechariah, one of the other, I don't remember, for multiplying the use of instruments. He crossed the line somewhere.
Yeah. But in terms of a proper worship, what you need to grasp is that this is performed by the Levitical tribe, okay? And everybody else is attending. But if you're not a Levite and you're not specifically assigned to a task, remember all of this has been laid out, and there is a hierarchy of how this is being done. And notice the order. It makes me think of 1 Corinthians 14 at the very end when the Corinthians are having all the trouble with their worship service. And Paul gets to the very end of that and he says, God's not the author of confusion. This was laid out and it was executed to a real degree of perfection. All right, so if you were to come into the temple, what would you see? Picture a courtyard, and it's almost impossible to find the kinds of pictures that I want to show in all this. I mean, I don't know why other people can't imagine what I need and just do it and put it on the internet. But there's this huge altar in the courtyard of the temple, and there is this bull that's been thrown on it. And so you walk into this temple, and you ever smelled an animal burning? If you grew up like I did out in the country, sooner or later you probably did, all right? And so your nostrils are just full of that, all right? That animal that's on fire and this sacrifice that is being altered here. And you've got all this fire and this smoke that's going up, the smell of sacrificial flesh. And the people as well are coming into the courtyard, and they're bringing their sacrifices, they're bringing their offerings, all of this for their sins. And in the middle of all the people, again, this is as good a picture as I could find. Michael, can you make that go forward? Okay. Thank you to the Temple Institute. I don't know who those people are, but it's going to be something, something like this, all right? Now, how different is this than what you're used to? Very different. You can see the guy, there's probably Asaph, he's standing out there on the pavement, and he's got the cymbals. Now, I don't know when he hits them or whatever, and you've got these guys in the forefront here and they've got flutes, and then you've got people standing up there with all kinds of various instruments, and they're all in these white robes, and so you've got this big animal, and it's on fire, and people are coming and going, and during all of this service, these guys are singing things like, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good," his loving kindness is everlasting, and all of this is happening all at once. And it's all done. We have record of it in the Old Testament, and we're just going to look at it briefly, but by professional singers. This became their life. This became their purpose in the whole scheme of things in terms of worship and in the life of Israel. And there are some examples of this. We're not going to spend just a ton of time with it, but if you look to the Psalms, you start to see things that you and I, generally speaking, just kind of overlook. Because for us, the Psalms are there to be read, and the ideas and the concepts and the truths there to be absorbed. And nobody in Israel ever thought about a psalm in that way, really. The Psalms were there to be sung. They were an expression, a vocal expression of how you feel towards God or towards one another or about life. Now, that's not to say there might be some in there that somebody just wrote to write, but by and large, this is the songbook of Israel. And this songbook is authored by certain people. So we've already seen this guy named Asaph. You remember him? Way back early on. David appointed him and Heman and Jeduthun to be over the service of music. But as you start to look through this, you can see that Asaph was somebody that was over the whole thing, the whole temple worship. And then if you look at things like, or places like Psalm 77, there is a caption. It may not be in all Bibles, but it is in most. It says, "For the director of music for Jeduthun." All right? Or I should have just said, "to the director of music for Jeduthun." That's a typo. The idea would be here is that Asaph wrote something, and then he gave it to Jeduthun to have it performed. And then Psalm 84 says, "For the director of music according to Gittith." We don't even know what that is. That's probably some kind, if you've ever seen a word like that in the Old Testament, it's some type of musical term that has probably to do with rhyme or meter, the way the song was sung. And then it goes on there to say a psalm of the sons of Korah. All right? Again, we're talking about the Levites here. So without just spending a ton of time on this, you can go through the Psalms and you can see these individuals, their names. And the reason they're there is because they are Levites and because they are writing and composing music for use in the temple worship. Now, it is also to say, and we'll get to this later, that these were sung in people's homes and at private gatherings. Now, how much time we got? Okay. I'm going to move really quickly because I want to get to where I want to get this morning so we can pick up where we need to pick up next Sunday. All right. There's a guy named Hezekiah. Anybody remember him? He's called a restorer. He was a restorationist. He wanted the kingdom of God to come back to what it needed to be, and it had gotten a long way from being what it needed to be. So in 2 Chronicles 29, 25 through 29. Yeah, 2 Chronicles 29, 25 through 29. What we actually get there in that passage is the camera lens zooms in on an actual worship in the temple, a Levitical worship there. And notice what it says in that passage. It says, "He then stationed the Levites in the house of the Lord with cymbals, with harps, and with lyres, according to the command of David, and of Gad the king's seer, and of Nathan the prophet. For the command was from the Lord through his prophets." All right, so why are we doing this? Okay, so in case anybody thinks I'm making any of this up, or David was making any of this up, it came, the command was from the Lord through his prophets. The Levites stood with the musical instruments of David. See, David made them. He had them made. He had them commissioned. He didn't play them in the Levitical service. And the priest with the trumpets. See, there again, we see these priests with these two trumpets. Then Hezekiah gave the order to offer the burnt offering on the altar. That's what we were looking at a moment ago. And when the burnt offering began, the song to the Lord also began with the trumpets. So these Levitical singers, they start singing, accompanied with the instruments of David, king of Israel, while the whole assembly worshipped. So all the people of Israel are hearing, not all of them, but at the time you couldn't get everybody in there, but all these people that have come are gathered. The singers also sang, and the trumpet sounded. All this continued until the burnt offering was finished. Now at the completion of the burnt offerings, the king and all who were present with him bowed down and worshiped. You ever want to know what happened in the temple? There it is in 5 verses. That is a really powerful passage to understand the Levitical worship that is commanded of God under the law of Moses. Now, this is the way the temple worship was done. This is the way it was commanded by God. Now, here's key. This was only ever done where? Oh, there it is. Okay, that's going to be our phrase, I promise. But something happened to the temple, and something happened to my clicker. Michael, hit that next slide. I don't know what's going on. In 586, Jerusalem got rocked, literally. And the temple was destroyed. Okay? Now, the worship then that was commanded in the temple couldn't take place. Remember in Deuteronomy 12:4, you shall seek the Lord in the place that I shall choose. Well, guess what? The place that God had chosen is gone. It does not exist at all. Now, if we step out and we look at, for example, Psalm 137. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is a psalm that is written by a captive in Babylon, okay? He says, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. So he's looking back and he's thinking about Jerusalem. Zion means Jerusalem. Upon the willows in the midst of it, we hung up our harps. Now, if you understand Levitical worship, then guess what you understand right here? This Levite that wrote this psalm says, I can't play a musical instrument and worship God. I have to hang up my harp. And he understands that fully. Why? Because it was not in the temple where God said, this is the place you will do this. All right, this is an enormous point to hold on to as we go through this. And so he says, I've got captors and they want songs, and the tormentors are saying to us, sing us a song of Zion. You know, play your little harp and sing a song for us. And he says, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? See, we can't do that. In other words, this Levite said, I can't play an instrumental music as a means of worship to God because I'm not in the temple. And the Jewish people understood this totally, and they understood it completely. And we'll see why as we keep moving through this. Okay, Psalm 42 and 43, I'm going to skip for right now. We'll come back and look at this. This is a good example of how a psalm, these two psalms are actually one psalm as they were performed. And we'll come back and look at this in terms of, we'll look at it now. We got 5 minutes? Okay. Sorry, I didn't know where I was going to go or how far I was going to get with this morning. All right. Psalm 42 was written by a Levitical singer again who went into Babylonian captivity. And there he says, when can I go to meet with God? And what would you say to that? He can't, but we would probably think, well, you can go to meet with God anywhere. But in the mind of a Levitical singer, there's only one place you could go to meet with God. You didn't meet with God anywhere else, and of course that was in the temple. There we go. And so, when we're looking at this psalm, if you look at verse 5, he says, someday I'm going to go back to the temple. You know, we hope that this when they go back, I really hope this gentleman was with them. All right? Because he's just, I want to go back there. And then as you look through this psalm, what you can see is that you have structure. The first 4 verses of Psalm 42 are the opening verse. All right? So the way this would work is the Levitical singers would sing all of that, or sometimes a single individual called the cantor, which is a fancy word for song leader. See, guess where we got a song leader from? I didn't start with a Christian church, by the way. We got it from, we'll talk about the Jewish worship, and specifically the synagogue service. All right? And then verse 5 of Psalm 42 is the chorus. And I should probably turn over there and attempt to at least read this. Okay? All right, so the first 4 verses, the cantor, the singer, would sing. And often this was done in a solo fashion. So imagine this morning if the song leader got up and he just sang the whole first verse and we all sat in the pews. Okay? And then when it came to the chorus, everybody sang. Okay? And then when the next verse rolled around, the song leader sang and everybody listened. And then when the chorus rolled around, everybody then joined in. That's what's happening. And this is repeated over and over all the way down through the last time that the chorus is sang in Psalm 43 and 5. Remember, when you look at these designations in your English Bible, sometimes somebody said, you know what, maybe we ought to make a line right there and make a new psalm. This is not 2 psalms. So it's just a good thing to keep in mind. Now, what I want to get to is this, and then we will pick up from this point next week. The Jews understood completely and totally that Levitical music and Levitical singing was tied to a place. That place was Jerusalem, and that place was the temple. And when the temple was destroyed, it ceases completely. And the Jews become an a cappella people. That's a fact of history. Okay. We're going to stop right there. Anybody got any questions? We got a couple minutes.
Where it says in the Bible, I don't know if this in the Bible it says at the time of this I winked at, and now command all men to repent. Was that part of this going away as well? The song, the leading of the music?
No. God's just simply talking about the fact that he was patient with people as Christ was coming. Anybody else? Was that way too much for one Sunday? I'm not sure how much to fit in. What I want you to see more than anything else is that it was spelled out, and the reason that instruments are used here is because that was specifically what God asked for. Okay? And that all of this was tied to the temple. And when the temple was over, so were the instruments. And the Jews understood that 150%. All right. And then we'll get into synagogue worship and all of that next week. Okay. Thanks for being here.